All right, with special hello to Mr. Madders. Hey, we're up to 27, which is good. Tom, Mr. Baxter, yeah, I can see you there. Tom, can you just say a few words? Can we just check your audio is working okay? As you're going to be kicking off quite soon.
Can you hear me? Okay.
Yeah, okay. Jan, how about you? I can see you're on mute, but if you could just come off mute a bit and just do a little test. So that one again, please. That's not great. I don't know whether that was just me. I couldn't hear much.
I couldn't hear Jan either, Peter.
Well, the pressure's on you, Jan, sorry. It was working fine just a few minutes ago.
I presume mine was okay.
Hi, Paul. I must have missed you joining. Yes, you're fine.
Yeah, I apologize. I thought I was going to be able to make the meeting beforehand, but my client called before this went overtime.
No problem. Jan, how are you doing?
Does this work now?
Yes, that's much better.
Very odd. We just had a test call and everything worked fine, but I brought the big gun. This is my podcast mic, which seems to be doing the job.
Okay, well, we're at 28. Things have stabilized. I suggest that we get going. There's an agenda which is attached to the meeting invite. Kate, I don't know whether you want to say a few words. If not, then I'll just do a very quick intro in relation to Tom, Paul, and Jan, and hand over the floor to them in turn.
Yeah, I'll quickly say something. You know, not long. So because I didn't get a chance to meet Jan and Paul previously, I have spoken to Tom. So again, just thank you on behalf of myself and the residents, just for putting that time together and making yourselves available, just really to help us navigate through what at the moment is just a very complicated and a messy trial proposal. So I know myself and quite a number of residents are just interested in finding out alternate views, getting your opinions on different things, just with being industry experts. So again, thank you. I'll hand over to Peter then if you want to.
Okay, great. Well, there should be plenty of time after the speakers have done their thing to ask lots of questions. I think if it's okay, I'll ask that we go through one followed by the other, and then do the questions at the end of all that. We have with us this evening Tom and Paul, who are founding members of the Hydrogen Science Coalition. That organisation was born out of frustration, really, with so much hype that they saw and the desire to correct a lot of that. So for them, I think they'll enjoy tonight. Jan works tirelessly putting out really thoroughly researched pieces at the RAP. Is a great source of information for many people such as myself, and I just want to say thank you to all three of you. And then, without any further ado, hand over. Paul and Tom, you haven't had a chance to confirm much, but are we okay for Tom to kick off? Is that all right?
By all means, yeah.
Okay. Right. Floor is yours, Tom.
Okay, well, again, thank you, people, for asking us along here. Just by way of introduction, I'm a chemical engineer, and I've worked in oil and gas for over 40 years. And a chemical engineer's job is really to, a lot of it is about energy management, how to safely manage energy, how to transform energy from heat to power and power to heat. I also have a parallel career as a lecturer at Aberdeen University, and one of the things I lecture on is process safety. So I've got a passion for energy and process safety, and that has led me to have a lot of concerns about what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing the media present, what I'm seeing the vested interests present in terms of the hydrogen story. And on the face of it, you can present a very compelling case for hydrogen. It's only when you start to kind of pull back the onion layers that you start to, I think, see a different story emerge, particularly around safety and what hydrogen is going to cost the taxpayer. So that's a bit about me. I don't know if the others want to introduce themselves, or I'll continue on some of my concerns. Sure.
By all means, Tom, go ahead.
What I'll do is I'll focus it for the moment on safety, and my training in oil and gas and looking after hazardous, explosive, inflammable substances it's come into play, and I'm specifically been looking at there's a program called High for Heat, which the government funded. And that High for Heat program concluded with the results of a quantified risk assessment. The quantified risk assessment is, as the name suggests, it's looking at the effects of both the probability of something happening and the consequence of it. So, for example, if you have a leak of hydrogen in your house, how probable is that to happen? And if it does happen, what is the consequence? So this work compared natural gas, probably the heating you've got at the moment, with hydrogen. And if you do a like-for-like comparison, the results showed that hydrogen is 4 times more likely to cause an explosion and have a risk of injury to a domestic user. And remember, I'm a domestic user as well, and I have no axe to grind in this debate. I've no vested interest whatsoever. I'm just trying to take my experience as a seasoned chemical engineer and someone who understands safety into the household. So when the government found it was 4 times more expensive, the consultants then looked at how can we make this as safe as natural gas. And what they've done is they've put like 2 what we call excess flow valves be either side of your hydrogen meter. And what that is proposing is that if you get a large leak of hydrogen in the house, then these valves close because they detect a large leak. Now that sounds okay. Sounds a bit like a fuse in your electrical appliances. But there's a lot of buts here. What they demonstrated by that, if you believe their numbers, is hydrogen has the same risk as natural gas if you put these 2 excess flow valves in. Okay? Now, if you look at the numbers are still telling you you're 3 times more likely to have an explosion or a fire with hydrogen. But because the flow valves reduce the amount of hydrogen that's come into your house, the fire won't be as big or the explosion won't be as severe. Now, I don't accept that in the sense that these flow valves, imagine it's Christmas Day, you've got your boiler on full, it's cold, you've got 3 gas rings on, you've got your oven on, so that amount of hydrogen has to go into your house. It won't protect you against that amount of hydrogen. It will protect you against, let's say you have a complete breakage of the pipe that comes from your meter into your house. So there's a whole scenario of events, of hydrogen leaks that will still occur. And by the government's own numbers, the household is 3 to 4 times more likely to have an explosion or a fire. Now, the way the results are presented is the kitchen and the whole house. Yeah. Now, if you look at the results, the kitchen has become a less safe place. The rest of the house has become a slightly more safe place. So the combination, they're arguing, means that you are just as safe. Now, I don't buy that at all. I spend lots of time in my kitchen, and these results are telling me that hydrogen will be around 3 times more likely to cause a fire or an explosion. So I'm not buying this analysis as demonstrating the safety of hydrogen in a household. We need a lot more nuanced debate around it than what Hayden and the other sponsors of this safety assessment are concluding. So I'm very concerned to the point I wouldn't have hydrogen in my house. I wouldn't do it. And I know lots of other engineers who understand quantified risk assessment are in a similar position to me. So rather than labour that point, I propose I'll just stop there. I hope what I was saying came across, and perhaps welcome any comments. Anyone want to chip anything in? Or Paul or Jan, you want to add anything to that?
I will just say, I'll get into kind of the basis of my argument, which is a little different than Tom's, but I will say that I 100% agree with what Tom said. I have maybe a decade less experience than Tom does, but a similar one on the other side of the Atlantic. I'm a Canadian. And I similarly have no axe to grind in this business. I've made lots of money making and using hydrogen and synthesis gas over the years. I just wouldn't want it in my house. I know what it takes to keep it industrially safe. Those conditions are not met in the house. They're not met in a commercial application either. There's special conditions that we take in industrial applications where we need to use hydrogen because that's the right chemical for the job, as opposed to it being used as a fuel, which we just simply do not do. So I will echo and completely agree with what Tom said there, and then I would make my own piece when I get my chance to speak. I
think you'll have to excuse my lack of expertise here, but I think I'm getting hands raised by Steve and Christine, if you guys want to ask a question. Maybe not.
Maybe not, might need to come off mute first if they're on mute. rookie mistake.
Sorry, can you hear me now? Yeah. Hi, Tom. Yeah. So what about the wider network outside of the house? The infrastructure for hydrogen, is that less safe? And are there any instances of hydrogen explosions within pipelines, and are they as devastating as gas explosions in the wider infrastructure?
Maybe I answer the last aspect first. Hydrogen is more explosive. It's more likely to explode, and if it does explode, creates higher energy forces that would say, if it was in a confined space, would take a wall down. It'll do that more readily than methane. At the moment, we don't really pipe hydrogen anywhere. We use it very close to where it's made, and there's a good reason for that. It's because it's a very difficult gas to pipe. Because of its nature, it finds leaks. Yeah. So we don't have really any history in the UK of long distance transportation of hydrogen. It does pose particular problems to existing metallurgy. Hydrogen, by its nature, causes something called hydrogen embrittlement, which can the containing metal loses its ability to hold the gas within it. So there's a lot of unanswered questions there. Generally, plastic pipe will be okay, but the mains, the large mains, many of them are unlikely to be suitable for hydrogen. They'll have to be replaced.
Tom or Paul, would it be worth just saying a couple of words about hydrogen versus methane in terms of the size of the molecule or the flammability range? Because I think there are two big points as to why it's more risky.
By all means.
Well, you take that.
You want me to take that, Tom? Sure.
Yeah, please, Paul.
So in order for something to catch fire or explode, there has to be a mixture of fuel and oxygen. And for methane, which is what natural gas is mostly made out of, the range is fairly narrow. It's between about 6% and about 18%, I think. Maybe it's as much as 20. If you have more than 20% methane in air, it won't catch fire. There's not enough oxygen. If it's less than 6%, it won't catch fire because there's not enough fuel. Well, with hydrogen, the range is between 4% and 75%. So that clearly is a much wider range. And that means that it's much more likely that a cloud of the right mixture of air and fuel will find a source of ignition, whether it be a light fixture sparking, or someone turning on a light, or a piece of combustion equipment, or a squirrel playing with matches or something. I mean, in chemical engineering, we always say that the source of ignition is out there to be found. What you need to do is you need to prevent the mixture of fuel and air in the first place, because if you let it go, it'll find a source of ignition. And the thing here is that the range is so wide that the likelihood that a mixture of that range finds a source of ignition is much, much higher. The other bit is that it's a very small molecule. It's the smallest combination of atoms that we're aware of, and it likes to sneak through things that when you've tested piping, for instance, with air or nitrogen, and you put hydrogen in it, it can still, even though the pipe was sealed against air, it can still leak hydrogen. And I've witnessed that firsthand many times because I've designed and built hydrogen containing equipment.
Questions and stuff on the site.
Hello. And what else? What was the other question then, Peter?
I think that kind of covered it, really. Its propensity to escape from whatever you try and contain it in, and the fact that when it does escape, it's much more likely to explode.
To find an explosive mixture. It also, as Tom mentioned, it has a higher flame speed and generates a greater shock wave than methane when it does explode. So it's more likely to cause damage when there's a fire. In fact, it's more likely to explode than it is to deflagrate, to just make a big flame. It's more likely to detonate, which means suddenly increase the pressure where the very, very fast fire happens, and that's the thing that's likely to cause damage. My
final observation, I think, for you guys to comment on would be, it rises it tends to pool, and I think that's a key reason why nobody has approved hydrogen for use in blocks of flats.
Methane, natural gas is mostly methane, and methane is a little bit less dense than air. You know, it's maybe about, round numbers, I guess about a typical natural gas mixture might be about half the density of air. So it will rise as well. But hydrogen, as you're aware, is very, very much less dense than air. It's about 1/10 the density of air. And so its tendency to rise is much greater. And so it will tend, just like a gasoline leak or a propane leak will tend to accumulate in low spots, a hydrogen leak will tend to accumulate in high spots. So that it's the fact that it does tend to accumulate somewhere is more the problem than the fact that it rises versus falling. It's when things have you know, so for instance, I don't use propane in my home either, because if there was a propane leak, it will tend to form a pool of propane in the bottom, in the basement, for instance. And there's been a great many incidents of propane leaks that have led to, you know, someone coming downstairs to check on the washing and turning on a light switch and the house blows up, because it forms that layer of the gas mixture with the right mixture with air in order to allow an explosion to happen.
Okay, thank you, guys. We've got a question from Adrian. Next, please.
Hello, Tom. Can you hear me? You can. Okay. It's just a comment about your safety case where the kitchen is sort of less inhabited than the rest of the house. Lots of houses now, the fashion is to be open plan. So you're actually living in the kitchen all the time. It's all sort of one. They're not separate rooms anymore.
It just further reinforces the concerns. Yeah.
Yeah.
Another thing that just, it's a simple thing, that how many of us light candles now as just to make the house a bit more homely? Yeah. You're just sitting there with an ignition source waiting for it. And just to flavour Paul's talk a little bit more, hydrogen needs 1/10 of the energy, 1/10 of a spark energy than methane to explode or go on fire. So even a little charge on a dust particle is likely to make a flame or an explosion from hydrogen. Whereas methane, natural gases, it's not great, but it's a whole lot more forgiving than hydrogen. If hydrogen's out, the chances are it will ignite.
Ian, I think you need to put your mic on mute.
My apologies.
Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, I don't see any more questions at the moment. So
Keith's got his hand up. Well, it's down there, Keith.
Could we? I think we've covered off the safety side of things.
Sorry.
The one on the agenda before that was hydrogen versus gas. Is hydrogen better for homes on any level? I think we've covered off the safety bit as part of the second point. The economic side of it, I think, Jan, you're going to pick up. I think we can probably wait for that one if you guys agree. Does that make sense to you, Tom, Paul, Jan?
Sure, we can talk about the economics later. Yeah.
We could maybe just do a quick run round. Do you, leaving aside the economics, which Jan will cover, do you see any benefits to hydrogen in the home, guys, Tom and Paul?
No. I mean, it's unequivocal for me. There's just absolutely no benefit that I can see, and Jan will discuss cost. And my two big concerns are safety and cost. Now, what you'll probably be hearing from Cadent and others is the convenience. It's a convenient changeover. And there possibly is something in that, but I'm not for it. Convenience. Convince me first that this is safe, and convince me cost-wise this is a better option for me.
Okay.
Yeah, certainly from my perspective, I agree with that. I think the concerns are safety and cost, and also I would add an even bigger one, and that is that I don't think it's really doing much in terms of what it's supposed to be doing, which is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Whether it's actually reducing greenhouse gas emissions in a way that makes sense to justify the cost and the risk is the real question from my perspective. And I'm not just a chemical engineer. I've been an environmentalist my whole life. And I want to see us actually do the right thing in relation to this global warming problem, because I have children and I care about their future. And as a consequence of that, I want us to make the right decisions that are defensible and durable. And my concern with hydrogen as a fuel extends to, and includes hydrogen being used as a fuel in the home and to replace natural gas, but it extends to many other uses of hydrogen. And if you're interested in knowing more about that, I would refer you to the Hydrogen Science Coalition's website, where you can have a look at our 5 principles, which are largely related to that fact. But my concerns, as I said, are not just the safety and the cost, and I share those concerns. I am concerned about its safety and about its cost, but my largest concern is that it's also not very effective at reducing greenhouse gas emissions for reasons that I can articulate to you if you like. So, I'm willing to put up with some inconvenience and some cost in order to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and make the atmosphere less likely to fry my children off the planet at some point. But it has to be worth it. It has to make sense, and it has to be the right solution, the right option. And in my opinion, hydrogen as a replacement for natural gas isn't that.
Well, could you take us through quickly how hydrogen is made for domestic use, the cost implications of it in the home, and then your rationale for what you've just said, really, why it's not an effective means of decarbonising?
Sure, absolutely. I will. I'll give you some detail there, and refer people that are listening to my writings and to the Hydrogen Science Coalition's website if you need more detail. First off, hydrogen right now is a fossil fuel. Well, it's not actually used as a fuel at all. It's a fossil chemical. It's a chemical that's made almost exclusively from natural gas and a little bit from coal and from petroleum as well. Almost none of it is made any other way, and almost all of the CO2 that results from making hydrogen out of those fossil fuels ends up in the atmosphere. So when you have something that is overwhelmingly, more than 99% made from fossils without carbon capture in the world right now, it begs the question, how is using that as something to displace another fossil fuel a good idea? And the answer given is, well, we can make hydrogen another way. We can make hydrogen a number of different ways, but one of the ways that we can make it is we can make it either by passing electricity through water and breaking the water into hydrogen and oxygen. That's called electrolysis, and the resulting hydrogen they call green hydrogen. And if the electricity is clean, meaning it's made without a lot of greenhouse gas emissions, it's made by wind and solar and the like, or perhaps by nuclear power, depending on your opinions on that, then the resulting hydrogen doesn't generate much greenhouse gas emissions, and so burning it should be better than burning a fossil fuel. The devil, of course, in that simplistic argument is in the details, and we'll get into that in a minute. But the other way that you can make hydrogen is you can make it the way that people make hydrogen today, which is by heating up steam and methane, the thing that natural gas is mostly made out of, together and passing them over a catalyst, and then you get a mixture of carbon monoxide and hydrogen, and then you can carry it out over, cool it down and pass it over another catalyst, and you can convert some of the water and the carbon monoxide to more hydrogen and CO2. And of course, if you have a bunch of CO2, people will tell you, well, we can just capture that, compress it, and shove it in a hole in the ground and hope that it doesn't come back, which is referred to as carbon capture and storage. Now, it sounds good, and it is in fact possible to do it, to make hydrogen and capture the CO2. And it's more possible to do that in a centralized facility that makes hydrogen than it is to do it in 1 million people's homes, right? You sending gas to their homes and having them burn it and then trying to capture the CO2 on everybody's boiler would be an impossibility. Impractical to the point of impossible. So the idea is you centralize the carbon capture at a hydrogen factory, and then you distribute the hydrogen. The devil there is also in the details. And the problem with this business of making this carbon capture based hydrogen, which they refer to as blue hydrogen, is, to follow their metaphor, it's rather less blue and more bruise colored. It's black and blue. The trouble with it is a couple things. One of them is that the hydrogen that's produced still results in some CO2 emissions, but it also results in some methane emissions, and methane is way worse as a greenhouse gas than CO2 is, especially on the shorter term, on the 20-year time frame. And when you take that extra methane leakage into account, what you find is that making so-called blue hydrogen with carbon capture and storage ends up being rather more black than people would like to admit. So it is possible to make hydrogen that's quite good, quite low in CO2 emissions, or in total greenhouse gas emissions from fossil gas, but it's expensive to do it, and it requires that the gas that you use be very low in methane leakage from the wells and the pipelines and so on that carry and distribute that gas from where it's found in the world to where it's produced. And in some places in the world, the gas is already too leaky to make the hydrogen that's produced blue at all. It's very black. And in other places, it's it's a matter of money. If you spend enough money on the carbon capture equipment, it'll do a good job. The trouble is, the blacker it is, and having it still considered as blue, the more money they make. So they're in a fundamental conflict of interest position in making it in the first place. And then the other part of it is, what are the alternatives? If the alternatives are better, which I'm sure Jan will go into in detail, the alternatives are better, then it really doesn't matter, how streamlined you can make your ox cart if there's a jet airliner next to it to take in comparison. If the alternative is better, making the bad alternative a better version of a bad alternative really isn't helping much. And that's my concern with the blue hydrogen bit. The green hydrogen, the obvious thing is, why don't you just use the electricity itself, which I believe Jan will get into. So that lines that up. So hydrogen is not a decarbonization solution to anything in the world in overall terms right now, because almost all of the hydrogen that we make in the world is made from fossils without carbon capture. It's not made by breaking water up using electricity. Although you can make green hydrogen with low CO2 emissions from renewable electricity, or you could make hydrogen from fossils and capture all the CO2, doing that is expensive, and the less good a job you do of it, the more money you make. So it puts the people doing so in an inherent conflict of interest. Happy to take questions on that. Richard, if you have a question, feel free.
Yeah, thanks. Just to introduce myself, I'm Dr. Richard Hawkswell Baldwin. I'm the Research and Campaigns Manager at the MCS Charitable Foundation. And I've been working with Peter, Kate, and the others on the call in the background on this. I just wanted to make a point that one point about Paul's comments around hydrogen that's really important about the UK context. We do not have carbon capture and storage. So any hydrogen currently being produced at the moment in the UK is either grey or a small amount of green. Now that's relevant to the trial, excuse me, particularly around Cadent, because HyNet and the development of blue hydrogen and carbon capture and storage, they're assuming that they're going to make this massive blue hydrogen infrastructure and this carbon capture and storage infrastructure in tandem, and to meet up at just the right time to make blue hydrogen be notionally a low carbon fuel. And there's a real problem with that. Well, there's many problems with that. No investment decision has been taken on any of the projects as yet, so none of them have had the go ahead. The UK currently stores precisely nothing, apart from, I think there's a couple of test sites or a couple of very small applications, but we're talking about an industrial scale process that does not exist in the UK. And more importantly, around the world, carbon capture and storage has a pretty poor track record. It tends to be very, very expensive, and it under-delivers and underperforms quite massively. Now, I'll send Kate some information on that to share with you. But one of the biggest and most recent CCS plants in the world is in a place called Gorgon in Western Australia. And they were only granted planning permission on the basis of capturing 80% of the emissions. Now, it was designed and built by Shell, amongst others, who obviously have a certain amount of money behind them. And they convinced the West Australian government, we can do this, it won't be a problem. From the day it's opened, it has not come anywhere close to reaching those targets. It's capturing less than 50%, but it's still operating. It's a liquid natural gas plant, and they're still producing carbon emissions, but they promised the West Australian government, we can do this because we've done the modelling, it works. Now, the exact same thing is happening in the UK. All these organisations are saying to the UK government, we can do this, we've done the modelling assessments, we've checked the aquifers, it can do it. However, the track record globally suggests it might not work anywhere near as well as they suggest it can, which is a massive problem for hydrogen, because without getting too complicated, there's something called the low carbon hydrogen standard in the UK. So hydrogen has to be produced to a certain carbon ratio. And if they can't meet that, then there's going to be billions of pounds worth of stranded assets. So the idea that blue hydrogen exists, which you'll be spoken to as if it's a thing. It's not. It's an illusion. It does not exist, and it relies on massive investment in blue hydrogen infrastructure and CCS infrastructure. And the big issue that I have is that CCS is just not the solution. Globally, we're at a 98.5% deficit around what we should have now to meet our Paris climate agreements and what we have. It has massively underperformed globally wherever it's been rolled out. And I just wanted to make that point. So,
yeah, cheers, Richard. That's certainly aligned with my perspective. I will add, just to underline what you're saying, being a Canadian, I have the dubious pleasure of being an owner and investor through my tax dollars in a blue hydrogen project, also built by Shell, that's called Quest, and it's in Alberta, and it's used to capture some of the CO2 from a hydrogen production facility that's used to upgrade the Athabasca bitumen, aka tar sand material in Alberta, so that it can be then sent elsewhere for refining. This project was largely publicly funded, so we actually have access to the data, which is very useful, because almost all of the projects in relation to carbon capture and storage are not public projects, and the data is not public. So what you get is claims as opposed to evidence. And that's of course difficult to accept, because the people making the claims are motivated to not necessarily be forthright and honest with their claims. So this project, as I mentioned, called Quest, it was built by very competent people, by Shell and by Fluor, who's a massive engineering company, very well respected engineering company. It's been running for about 5 or 6 years. It captures about 78% of the CO2 that is in the the gas mixture that contains the hydrogen, which they have to remove anyway before the hydrogen is useful. But that is only 45% of the hydrogen emitted by the facility. The other 55% goes straight to the atmosphere, just like it did before. And the other part of it is that that's just how much it captures. It also needs energy in order to do that capture, and that energy is made by burning more natural gas to make electricity and heat. And that reduces the net amount of CO2 captured from 45% to 35%. But of course, this is only talking about CO2, and methane is the other gas that we have to concern ourselves with. When one takes the methane into account and uses the world average leakage rate of 1.5% on that calculation, the net capture drops from 35% to 21%. And by the way, the Canadian public paid for this to the tune of almost $1 billion in capital and $50 million a year to run it. It is capturing 1 million tons of CO2 per year, but the cost per ton of CO2 emissions averted is about 125 Canadian dollars per ton. So it's not cheap. And remember, this is the easiest 35% of the CO2 that they're capturing. When one looks at HyNet, they're planning to do a much different process. They're planning to use something called autothermal reforming, which makes capture easier, but it does it at the cost of wasting more gas. And the other problem with this process is that it's using some new technology developed by the catalyst company Johnson Matthey that is not in place, to my knowledge, in any of their facilities in the world yet. It's a world first. So that doesn't mean that it won't work, but it does mean that there's a technical risk that it might not work, or it might not work well, or it might not work for long. So I would add that as a caveat and say they are trying their best, or at least trying hard, to capture more of the CO2 in this project than Quest has done. But they're doing it in a way that has some risk associated with it. And as Richard mentioned, the past projects associated with carbon capture and storage have not worked very well. They have tended to underperform. The capture part's not hard. Let me make that clear. We do that every day. We remove CO2 from stuff that we need because it's valuable, like natural gas. The capture part works. The trouble is capturing CO2 from low concentration mixtures where there's a lot of nitrogen. For instance, after you've had a burner that's burned all of the methane, you get a mixture of CO2 and oxygen and nitrogen from the excess air that's present. And capturing that CO2 is difficult. And by difficult, I mean it costs a lot. So there's your challenge. So to do blue hydrogen really blue as opposed to blackish blue, and to truly reduce the CO2 emissions by a lot, is very costly. And the blacker you let them get away with making it, the more money they make.
Can I just summarize a couple of things there? So we've heard, I think, Paul, 21 or 35%, depending on how you cut the numbers, and Richard, 50% efficiency in terms of carbon capture in Australia. Just as a point of reference, what percentage of the CO2 would need to be captured, assuming 0.5% leakage, which I think is the relevant figure for the UK? We're better than the world average. Roughly what percentage would need to be captured if we compare that with the 21 or the 35 or the 50%, which we're seeing elsewhere in the world, in order to give us hydrogen, which was net zero compatible?
Very good question. In order to make that blue hydrogen as low emissions in total greenhouse gas emissions as if you made it from water using electricity from wind and solar, you would have to capture over 95% of the CO2, including that 5% leakage. So 95% capture is not easy. You're fighting a battle against thermodynamics, and that costs you energy, and it costs you capital cost in order to do it. It is absolutely not impossible. Let's be clear. It's possible, chemical engineers could come up with a way that would capture 99.99999% of the CO2, but no one could afford the resulting hydrogen.
Can I just quickly add a point on that? I mentioned the low carbon hydrogen standard. Now, without wishing to get boring and geeky about government regulations, the low carbon hydrogen standard was set by government as a measure that hydrogen has to meet in order to be able to be classified as low carbon. And that's important because the only hydrogen that they're supposed to pipe anywhere is low carbon. For blue, Paul's right. I mean, the benchmark in the UK to qualify as low carbon is incredibly high. They are making claims they'll be able to do 95. Plants that aren't achieving over 85 for a certain period of time will have to close until they can put in remedial process to improve it. But the 90% plus is a requirement of the low carbon hydrogen standard, which, as Paul has alluded to, is incredibly difficult to achieve. There's only a tiny bit more context, and I don't want to take up too long on this. It's important to note there's only 28 operating CCS plants anywhere in the world at the moment. There's a tiny number of them, 20 of which actually use it to get more oil out of the ground. One of the only places in the world where they are achieving anything like a 90% capture rate is in Norway, where they have been doing it for a while. And that's always held up as well, the Norwegians can do it, so why can't we? It's like, well, 1 out of 28 isn't the best ratio to be working on as a case study for success. And I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And if I could just ask a question of the speakers, and maybe you as well, Richard, because you have clear expertise. How does this pan out? Do the oil and gas companies, do the network operators put their hands in their pocket and get paid on results? Or is it likely to be the same sort of model as you've seen in Canada and you've referred to, Richard, as in Australia, where there's an awful lot of taxpayer funding that comes first, and the results may or may not be what we want?
Could I briefly speak to that? It's important to bear in mind, as I said earlier, no final investment decision has been taken. All these companies, all these fossil fuel incumbents are, particularly fossil fuel incumbents, but also green hydrogen, all of them are talking about like it's a done deal and it's going to happen. It's important to note that the final investment decision, the actual go-ahead, hasn't been made on a lot of these projects. A lot of the development work is going on and lots of the preliminary work is going on, but the actual go decision is not there yet for a lot of these. One of the reasons for that, and again, without getting into too much policy technical stuff, there's lots of ongoing consultations within BEIS, the Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy Department, around what they're calling business models. And a business model in this context is effectively a subsidy scheme, because none of these projects will make money in and of themselves. They require subsidies in various different forms. Why is that important? Well, that's important because virtually none of these business models have been finalized yet. For hydrogen production and the low carbon hydrogen standard, they have. But when you start talking about carbon capture and storage does not make money unless it has government subsidy. Because the product it's capturing, if you capture it and permanently store it, it's worth nothing. And that's why the only way that carbon capture and storage has been commercialized anywhere on Earth is by using it to get more oil out of the ground, because then you can sell that. In the UK, they're not planning to do that. So it relies on these things called the business models. And the business models, gosh, there's one for carbon capture, utilization and storage. There's one for transport and storage of hydrogen. There's one for power with bioenergy, carbon capture. There's loads and loads of different business models, none of which have been fully finalized yet. So to answer your question, Peter, the way they make money from it in the short term is government subsidy.
I think we get the idea. And then the thing that scares me is the money comes up from taxpayers, but we have no guarantee whatsoever of the results. But we are probably labouring this one.
There's a significant risk of stranded. There's a significant risk that there's going to be billions of pounds worth of investment in infrastructure. Someone's TV's on.
There's a few people. Someone is off mute. If I could ask you to go on mute, possibly Graham Clark. That's better.
There's a real risk there'll be a lot of investment in projects that never actually end up functioning.
And when you say investment, we're talking taxpayer investment.
Within some of the business models, there is scope for the government to pay investment costs accrued by developers. Yes.
I mean, the Norway Equinor one is very significantly taxpayer funded. Paul, you've spoken to the Canadian project, which you put your tax money into. The Western Australia one, I think, again, there's a significant element of taxpayer funding there.
Yes.
I mean, taxpayer funding is necessary to transition, but the scary thing here for me is there's just absolutely, when we've got the stats, 21 to 35% in Canada, 50% in Australia, required rate over here about 95%. There's a big jump there to make, and that just needs to be thought through, because per household, the conversion to to hydrogen per household is around about £7,000 for each and every household.
I'll add one quick point, Peter. I just want people to realize that, right now, people can make hydrogen without carbon capture, so just dumping that large amount of CO2 to the atmosphere. They can make hydrogen out of natural gas for about $1.50 a kilogram. The gas costs that they feed to the process, the wholesale gas that they feed to the process, costs about $3.50 per million BTUs, so per unit of energy. And that results in a wholesale price of $1.50 per kilogram of hydrogen, which is $11 per million BTUs. Okay, so even black hydrogen is an expensive fuel, which is why we don't waste it as a fuel, because it's made from a fuel with losses and with capital investment. Now, if you have to do capture of the CO2 that comes off and permanent storage, all of that costs you money. It costs you more capital and more energy. So it's going to be more expensive.
We're eating into Jan's session here. He's messaging me. I don't know whether we want to see it, whether we wanted to do his piece. Sorry, Jan. Could we switch to you, and could you do your piece, please?
Yeah, sure. I wasn't sure whether we skipped my part and just went straight into questions, Peter, because you said at the beginning we would do questions after. But I'm happy to do that if we have time. I can spend 10 minutes on costs. Would that be useful?
Sure. Well, people seem to want to raise the questions as we went, and I just went with the flow. We had an hour and a half on the agenda. I'm sure people will drop off if they've got other things to do. I think, yeah, just go for it, Jan, and there's no pressure. Do your slots as you intended.
That's fine. Bear with me. I just have to share my screen. I have some slides, if that's okay. I hope you can. Oh, that's the wrong one. I hope you can see full screen. I can't see you. You're not. If you're nodding, I can't see you. Sorry, I see my slides.
Yeah, we can see it, Jan. Yeah.
Excellent. Yeah. Excellent. Let's make sure I can skip the next slide. Yes, that works. So just very briefly on my background. So I work at RAP. That is an energy research institution. We do a lot of work in Europe and different countries, including the UK. Done a lot of work for BASE. Worked with the Committee on Climate Change in the UK, but also in Europe with European Commission and other governments across Europe. And I'm also a researcher at Oxford University, where I've done a PhD many years ago on how to decarbonize home heating. So that's my background. I have never taken any funds from the gas industry or the heat pump industry or the hydrogen industry. I'm not funded by any particular industry, so I don't have any sort of stake in this, just to be fully transparent. I just wanted to give you a few sort of headlines on costs, really, and then maybe if we have time later, talk about some of the alternatives to hydrogen for decarbonizing home heating. Just a few words of background, perhaps on the UK hydrogen strategy. I keep this very short because there's a lot of detail there, but I just wanted to sort of put things into perspective. In 2021, last year, the hydrogen strategy came out, and in that strategy, the government says that hydrogen could become a like-for-like alternative for buildings currently heated by natural gas. Very important is that it could become, it's not said that it will, and the government says that by 2026 there will be a strategic decision on hydrogen for heating. So nothing is set in stone at all. Yeah, at this point, all the government has done is to commit to trials. The actual amount of hydrogen that will be used in buildings, according to the strategy in 2030, is very, very small. It's about 0.3% of current gas use in buildings. So it's a tiny amount that could go up if the government decides that it's a sensible way to heat buildings. But for 2030, at this point, that is basically the trials. You know, the number that you see here for buildings, that is the amount of hydrogen needed to complete the trials. There are many different trials. I don't want to go through this in detail, but the trial in Whitby is just one of many. There are also further much larger trials being planned for a whole town. There is trials going on blending, and also there's a development of hydrogen-ready appliances already. There are prototypes of those. So there are lots of things going on to test the use of hydrogen, but at this point, it's all about testing, assessing, evaluating. There hasn't been a commitment yet of any kind to what extent buildings might be heated with hydrogen. And I wanted to talk about costs briefly, and I wanted to do that in kind of two steps. First, I want to talk about UK costs of hydrogen, and then move on to the question, what does international evidence say about hydrogen for heating more generally, and then conclude. So for the UK, I'm going to separate this into blue and green hydrogen, because those are the two main types of hydrogen that people talk about. And the first, I think, important point I wanted to make here is really that hydrogen can never be cheaper than the fuel it is made from. It seems an obvious point, but it's very important. You know, sometimes I hear that hydrogen will be cheaper than using natural gas. That's very hard to believe when the hydrogen is actually made from natural gas. And I will explain in a minute why that is. Or hydrogen could become so cheap that it's a lot cheaper than using electricity. Well, if it's made from electricity, again, that's very difficult to see how that would work. So let me sort of explain that in a bit more detail and actually show you some cost figures to compare it against the current cost of gas. So for green hydrogen, it's important to understand that a lot of energy is actually lost in just producing the hydrogen. And I'm sure Paul and Tom will have other figures. These might be too optimistic, just from a very recent study that has been done. So we actually need significantly more energy to put in to make the hydrogen and then burn it in the boiler. And we lose quite a lot of energy on the way. That's the purple arrow here. That just happens as part of manufacturing. Again, Paul and Tom can explain exactly why that is, but essentially it's waste heat that it can't be used in the hydrogen production process. And when you then translate that into costs, there's a very useful resource. I'm using the government own prediction here, which shows you 4 different years in the future how hydrogen costs could evolve. And let me talk you through this. So the upper curve, grid electricity, shows you the cost in pence per kilowatt hour at the point of production. This is at wholesale level, point of production, not retail price. That's very important to understand. When hydrogen is made from just grid electricity. So if you have an electrolyzer that you plug into the grid and you make hydrogen, that's what the cost would be. The shaded area, the blue shaded area around it, shows you the minimum and maximum estimates that the government is assuming for the cost of hydrogen from grid electricity. So you see that currently it's about 16p per kilowatt hour, maybe going down to 14, 13 pence per kilowatt hour. And you compare that to the cost per kilowatt hour for natural gas before the pandemic, so 2015 to 2020, right at the bottom of the chart, which was about 1.5 pence per kilowatt hour. Again, this is wholesale level, at retail level. So the gas that you all get in your boilers has a much higher price, of course, because there's also distribution charges in that and other costs too. So this is just the wholesale level cost. The retail costs are much higher. But that's how the government is calculating those costs. So that's why I compare them to that. You then see another red dotted line around 8 pence per kilowatt hour. This is the average gas price currently since the invasion of Ukraine. So since February, gas prices have shot up and then more around 8 pence per kilowatt hour. you see that grid electricity, hydrogen would still be more expensive according to the government, even compared to those really high gas prices right now. So what about if we had offshore wind, dedicated offshore wind that is specifically built for making green hydrogen? You can see the middle black curve here with a slightly green shaded area. We're still way above the average gas prices before the pandemic. And even until the mid-2030s, we wouldn't even reach current gas prices with dedicated offshore wind hydrogen, according to the government's own figures here. And then finally, sometimes I hear we could just use curtailed renewables. So that means, when there's too much electricity being produced that can't be taken by the grid, we have to shut down, wind and solar to make sure the grid is not overloaded, and we could use that renewable energy to make hydrogen. Well, if we did that, hydrogen would be quite a bit cheaper, but even then, it's still significantly more than the gas prices before the pandemic. So overall, in 2050, still 3 to 11 times higher prices than natural gas prices before the energy price crisis hit. That's kind of the main conclusion I was drawing from this data, and it's just based on official government data and Ofgem data, which is the energy regulator, of course, in the UK. So that's for green hydrogen. And I want to move on to blue, and again start with a graphic that shows why hydrogen, blue hydrogen, is going to be more expensive than natural gas. The main reason here is losses, again, in the production process, and Paul has already described those. Essentially, you need to put in an awful lot more gas to get the same amount of energy because of these efficiency losses involved in the process of getting hydrogen out of natural gas. And that translates into higher costs, which I will show you now on the next slide. Slightly simpler graphic. Again, you have the average fossil gas price currently since the invasion of Ukraine at the top, and then pre-pandemic fossil gas price at the bottom, as on the previous slide, with costs. And blue hydrogen sits about in the middle of those two price trajectories, but it's about 3 to 4 times more still than the average gas price, before so earlier this year. And you have to also understand that, of course, if we now made blue hydrogen, the costs would be a lot higher, because this projection was done in 2021 and was based on prices around that time, which were significantly lower. So blue hydrogen costs now would certainly be higher than the average gas price we currently see. How much higher? I haven't calculated that, and the government hasn't calculated that either, but significantly higher than 8 pence per kilowatt hour at the point of production. So that's kind of the summary of what the cost data for the UK says. So green hydrogen, again to repeat, about 3 to 11 times more expensive than gas prices before the pandemic, and for blue hydrogen, we're talking about 3 to 4 times more expensive. Possibly more, because gas prices have gone up, and so will have gone up the cost of blue hydrogen production. That's on the costs. I'm sure you will have some questions on that later. I know there's a lot of detail, but I just wanted to show you the full picture of what data is available for the UK. And now, just very briefly on the independent evidence on hydrogen for heating. I spent a lot of time trying to understand what kind of studies have been done in this area. And I found 32 studies that were carried out without any funding from any particular industry. So no funding from, for example, the gas industry, from the heat pump industry, the boiler industry, the electricity industry. These are all studies done independently of any particular business interests. And I found 32 studies. And none of them supports the use of hydrogen for home heating, at least at scale. Maybe in some niche applications, but not at scale. And here are just some of the organizations that have produced studies on this: the International Energy Agency, the International Panel on Climate Change, McKinsey, the UK Energy Research Centre. There are many others, Imperial College, many very reputable international and national organizations, and they all come to the same conclusions. And And that work has been published in a journal, peer-reviewed journal recently. I know some of you will have seen that, where I collate all the results and look at all these studies. And the headline is what I said before: none of them supports the widespread use of hydrogen for heating. Why is that? Well, the main reason really is to do with the cost figures I've shown you. The conclusion is that hydrogen for heating is going to be significantly more expensive than all of the alternatives that exist. I don't think I have time to go through them in detail, but essentially we're talking about the use of district heating, that is local heat networks. We're talking about heat pumps, energy efficiency. Those are the key three technologies that offer a cheaper pathway to reducing carbon emissions, and already today can be deployed. So that's all I wanted to talk about, really, and just summarize in three conclusions. The first one is that hydrogen will only be used in small quantities for heating in the UK by 2030. You remember the 0.3% share compared to natural gas consumption right now in homes will be hydrogen, according to the government. Hydrogen is very likely, nobody really knows, of course, but it's very likely that it will cost significantly more than fossil gas at pre-crisis prices. That is because of the inefficiency of production. And then finally, there are more cost-effective alternatives for decarbonizing heating. And I could talk about more what those are, perhaps if we still have time. That's all I wanted to cover, and I look forward to any questions you might have, or any comments.
Thank you very much, Jan. Any questions?
Prices have jumped by almost 50%.
Well, what can we do about it? How can we change it? How can we change the course?
How can we change the costs?
No, the course. It seems to be just going ahead anyway, doesn't it, right now? What can we do as participants in the experiment do to change it?
Well, what the purpose of this call, I think, is really just to arm you guys with the fact, in the hope that you can talk to your fellow residents.
Yeah,
yeah.
Spread the word, yeah.
I wouldn't lose hope, because although there are some pretty powerful forces in the shape of Cadent, they need huge subsidies, and the government isn't made of money. There's a lot of people who understand enough within the government. The Committee on Climate Change, CCC, is incredibly well respected. Very, very good people. They're an independent body that advises the government. Well, Jan, you know that body better than I ever will do. What does the CCC say about all of this?
Well, the CCC sees a limited role in some hybrid systems for hydrogen. I think it's 11% of all homes the CCC believes could have a hybrid system, which means a heat pump together with a hydrogen boiler. But the majority of the heat would be produced by heat pumps, even in those buildings that have a hybrid system. And the majority of homes in the UK, the CCC believes, will have a heat pump going forward, because that's cheaper to run and doesn't require vast amounts of renewables. I didn't really go into the details of that, but you need about 6 times more renewable electricity to make the same amount of heat if you go down the green hydrogen route compared to a heat pump. And 6 times more renewables means you need 6 times more wind farms, 6 times more land, 6 times more resources. And that has huge implications in terms of costs and whether it's actually practical. The chief executive of the Committee on Climate Change has said that he doesn't believe it's actually feasible to deploy that many renewables and make that amount of hydrogen, because we just don't have the land and the resources to do that. And we're already behind in actually scaling up renewables, even to decarbonize the electricity that we use. So if we then add all that hydrogen production, it will become very, very difficult indeed. So the CCC is rather skeptical of hydrogen. They're not anti-hydrogen. I'm not anti-hydrogen either, but they're skeptical as to when it comes to the large-scale usage of hydrogen for heating.
And could I just flip back to one of the points in your slide, which is that the government's forecasts show that hydrogen made from curtailed renewables, this is where the wind is blowing too much, or there's too much solar on the grid, and we just can't handle it all in the normal course. So what happens is we have a load of electrolyzers, things that split water into hydrogen and oxygen, and these things will fire up to absorb the excess electricity. And I'd just like to get Paul's view on that and what you thought of that, Paul.
Yep. The idea is bollocks. Let's just be clear. It's electrolyzers are not only not cheap, you know, and they're absolutely not free. They're very expensive pieces of equipment, and you don't make money from them by running them part-time. So not only can you not make money or make cheap hydrogen, if you will, by running an electrolyzer just every once in a while when the wind blows too much, you can't make money making hydrogen from the entire output of just wind turbines. The resulting hydrogen is too expensive. The hope is that one day electrolyzers will get cheap enough that you could make hydrogen that's cheap enough just from the entire output of wind turbines. But the notion that they'll get cheap enough that you can make money running them 2% of the time or 5% of the time is just nonsense. It's a talking point. It's not real. It will never be the case. And in fact, the first, let's be clear, I'm not anti-hydrogen. That would be insane. I've spent most of my career working on hydrogen and syngas. It would be a really strange choice for me to pick something that I hate to work on. The thing that I think is important is that we distinguish how hydrogen is being used. I'm against wasting hydrogen as a fuel. Why? Because we make 120 million tons of the stuff in the world per year, and we don't burn almost any of it. You know, we use it as a chemical. Some of that chemical use, for instance, is making the ammonia that's making all the nitrate fertilizers that are used to feed half the human population on Earth. If we have any green hydrogen in excess of our, you know, that we feel that we can afford to make, that would be the obvious use for it, would be to make fertilizers so we can keep eating. That's the logical use for the stuff, not wasting it as a gas replacement in boilers for homes. I mean, that's just pitiful. We don't do that now because it's more expensive than what we feed it. And that will be absolutely true if we make it from electricity in the future as well.
Thank you, Paul. So the scenario that results in the cheapest hydrogen under the green scenario, just don't take that as a given. There's a very clear.
Yeah, Peter, to be clear, there are some places in the world where, as an example, Western Australia, they're thousands of miles away from anybody that wants electricity. Of course, they're also thousands of miles away from anybody that wants hydrogen. So the notion is that those places which have a wonderful combination of wind and solar, where when the sun goes down, the wind blows in off the sea, and they get this lovely high reliability, high capacity factor mixture of wind and solar. Those places will make hydrogen, and they'll make it into ammonia to use as fertilizer, and maybe they'll use it to make steel and other uses. But they're not going to ship it to the UK to burn in your boiler. And the notion that anybody is going to ship you cheap hydrogen made in Australia to burn in your boiler, and that's going to be a cheap way to heat your home, get that completely out your head. It's not happening. It's not happening from Canada. It's not happening from Chile. It's not happening from Australia. It's not happening from the west coast of Africa either. It's just not going to happen. As one of the characters, commentators likes to put it, only homeopathic quantities of liquid hydrogen will be shipped anywhere, honestly.
Okay, well, there's lots more things I'd like to ask you guys about, but there's some questions from the audience. Although they seem to, yeah. So I've got Margaret Walsh. If you'd like to ask away, Margaret.
It's not so much that I want to ask anything. I would like to obviously thank the speakers for the information they have given us, which, to be honest, from my own research that I have done, and obviously it depends what research you're looking at, obviously, it confirms everything that I had formed an opinion on anyway. I have got a medical background, but my family have got science backgrounds, and my family live down south, and they have also said there is no way that they would use hydrogen. I haven't formed an opinion, yes or no. I just wanted the details and the transparency and the honesty. And I just, again, thank the speakers for confirming what I already thought, really. I am all for renewable energies. Obviously, you know, that's without a doubt. And if there was an alternative, I'd be very interested in that. So thank you, everybody.
Peter, could I just make a very quick addition to the point that you raised about curtailment and using otherwise wasted renewable electricity or excess renewables from hydrogen production? I've actually done a calculation for the UK. We already have some curtailment in the UK because of our offshore wind farms, and we could make about 0.2% of hydrogen as a percentage of current natural gas use in the UK from curtailed electricity. So it's 0.2%. And even if you had, let's say, 100 times more renewables, you're still not getting anywhere near the quantities that you would actually need to make sufficient amounts of hydrogen from curtailed electricity. So yes, there might be a slice of that, but the suggestion that we're just going to use that, I think is, I would ask the question, where is that going to come from? And actually wanting to, would want to see the models that predict that huge amount of electricity that is available for hydrogen production. It's highly unlikely. I think it's wishful thinking, if anything, but it's not based on evidence.
Agreed. Graham, question for you or a comment?
Thank you, Chair. I would also like to echo the thanks for the speakers. It's been very interesting, very enlightening. I do note that that Councillor Rooney is on the call, and I was wondering what his impression is, because basically I feel that this hydrogen, the UK is not going to go down a hydrogen route. However, there will be a lot of damage done to people's houses and people's environments in Whitby, and maybe even people killed, 4 times the risk of explosion. I haven't really heard any input from councillors, or I know Justin's gone now, but particularly I'd like to hear what Councillor Rooney thinks about this, when really, in my opinion, we should be pushing for the electrical based or the other alternatives that Jan was talking about. So that's my question. What's the council viewpoint?
Put Councillor Rooney on the spot there. Councillor Rooney, is that something that you feel that you can respond to?
At the moment, I'm listening to all the information that I possibly can. It's been enlightening tonight, as you say. There's been a lot of good information put out there. So I'm going to go away and decide myself which way this is going.
You feel clearly you've got 3 speakers, you've also got me, and you can probably guess from my tone, none of us think that hydrogen has any meaningful role in domestic heating. What I very much want to do, and I know Kate agrees, as do the speakers here and others, we want to put a much more positive way forward, or range of way forwards. Jan's referred to district heating, to heat pumps, to energy efficiency. There are alternatives. This isn't the call to go into those in detail, but I think having the positives rather than just saying no, 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 no makes a hell of a lot of sense. Okay. Keith, your hand is still up, but I think that might be from earlier.
Well, it is and it isn't. I still want to get this question in. It's for Paul.
Go for it then. Paul,
you were saying that in your history, you've had trouble with hydrogen pipelines and testing those, and that you tested them with, I think you said air and nitrogen, for example, for leakage. Is it feasible in any way to test an existing gas main for being hydrogen proof using hand tools without filling that main with hydrogen?
It's a very good question. So I'll answer that. There's a little bit more to it than that. First off, the problem in the natural gas grid with hydrogen, Tom spoke to that earlier, and I'll just underline what he said. There's a lot of nonsense out there in relation to people assuming that because it's a gas that you can just shove hydrogen in the gas mains in place of natural gas and get away with it. The distribution system that carries the gas to your individual homes, it might leak a bit, but most of that leakage will be in places where it'll matter as a greenhouse gas, but it won't matter from a health and safety perspective. The trouble is actually more in the the transmission network that carries gas long distances. And if anybody's planning to use any of that infrastructure, those pipes and those compressors to carry gas, to carry hydrogen in place of natural gas, they've got another thing coming. The materials are wrong. The compressors are too small by a factor of 3, not by a little. So there are big problems with that. As far as actually testing your piping, in or near your home to see if it leaks, I suppose you could do a helium leak test, but helium's a non-renewable and rather rare thing these days. It's rather expensive, and it is possible for you to do a helium leak test and then to have something leak with hydrogen afterwards. Helium would do an adequate job. I think it's too expensive for people to use. So what they will tend to do is they'll pressurize the system with air to quite a bit more pressure than expected. And if it doesn't leak that, then they'll say, okay, it's probably okay with hydrogen. And then they'll walk around with a handheld device that will allow them to sniff for hydrogen. It's called a thermal conductivity detector. And if they don't find any leaks with that, they'll go, okay, if you need no more, it's good enough.
Okay, thanks. I'm asking the question because we have engineers going to people's houses, testing their gas main into the property for leaks, saying, no, it's fine, it'll be fine for hydrogen. And I just found that a bit strange given the size of a hydrogen molecule.
Yeah, it is a bit, Graham. Another thing to keep in mind is that hydrogen will permeate right through the plastic pipe. Now, it doesn't make the plastic pipe brittle and more likely to break. It just walks right through the wall. So quite a bit of hydrogen leaks through intact plastic piping.
Right. Thanks for that, Paul.
You're muted, Peter.
Thank you, Graham. One thing I've seen on the Facebook group, and this is for you, Paul, if there's a pipe which is buried in an internal wall, a stud wall, for example, is that something that is still an issue potentially for hydrogen leakage?
Well, the trouble is that the methods that people use, I'll give you an example. When we handled hydrogen in the chemical plant context, we were very careful about what kinds of joints that we made between pipes. you know, if you go around, you have to run a pipe from here to there, and you have a bunch of elbows and T's for things to come off, and valves and fittings and so on. We were quite careful about what we picked and what methods we used for joining those pipes. And the methods that are well and good enough for natural gas are much less so for hydrogen. They're much more prone to leakage. So from my perspective, you know, in the industry, we wouldn't tolerate the methods that are used. So now, mind you, the pressures that are in your home are very low. So the driving force for leakage is very low. So if there's a leak, it would tend to be a fairly slow one through intact piping. But, you know, the worry would be what happens if there's damage to, say, a flex line that runs to an appliance. You know, someone's moving the cooker in order to clean behind it, and breaks off the line. Which has been known to happen. I mean, my neighbor did it just recently. He was doing some renovations, and when they connected the gas again, they had a big gas leak, and they found out that it was damaged during moving the cooker around. So these are the sorts of things that I'd be more troubled about than little leaks. The trouble, of course, Peter, is that the little leaks, if they're in enclosed spaces, like for instance, in this room that I'm in right here, there's a gas line running right above my head that runs to the cooker in the kitchen, and that enclosed space is relatively tight. You could potentially have quite a lot of hydrogen in it. And one last thing to keep in mind is that fossil natural gas doesn't smell. The reason that it has an odor is we add an odorant to it. We add a chemical to it that stinks so that you can smell it when it leaks. And the odorants that we use for natural gas don't work very well with hydrogen for a couple of reasons. One of them is that the odorants that we use kill the catalysts of fuel cells. And some of the people that want to use the hydrogen want to use it not for home heating, but to run fuel cells to make electricity. The other reason is that some of the odorants react with hydrogen. And another problem is that the odorant may be safe enough to use with methane, but not with hydrogen, because the hydrogen lower explosive limit is lower. So you, at concentrations where there's a problem, you won't smell it. So there are problems with the odorants as well. They might be solvable problems, but
thank you, Paul. We're getting a bit tight on time. I can see a couple more questions. I can see Steve and Christine and Kate. I'm going to take those. If there's time for just a very quick snippet, Jan, on your heat pump, but let's do these last two first. Steve, Christine.
Yeah, hi. So as well as the hydrogen pipelines, the wider scheme of the HyNet scheme will be piping around lots of CO2 as well, and we're looking at bringing it in from other areas, from what I've seen. So we're going to have lots of CO2 pipelines coming through the area. Does anybody have a comment on that? I mean, CO2 sounds pretty benign, but I'm sure putting it through a pipeline, it's not. So is there anything we should be looking for in regards to CO2 leakages?
Okay, Tom or Paul?
It is an asphyxiant. So, you know, if you take a breath in a room full of CO2 with no air in it, you're going to lose consciousness pretty quickly. There have been incidents where there have been natural releases of sudden releases of large quantities of CO2, and they've killed large numbers of people. There was an incident in a lake in Africa. Oh my goodness, I forget how many years ago, but where there was kind of a burp of CO2 that had been at the bottom of a large lake, and it asphyxiated a large number of people. So a break in a CO2 pipeline would be a very dangerous event. I'm confident they could design new pipelines for that purpose. That would be more than adequately safe. So I wouldn't be too worried about it, but you know, it's not a zero hazard issue.
But for members of the public, though, I guess that risk is diluted. Would that be fair?
Well, again, it depends on where the line is.
Yeah. Okay. Okay, fair enough. Moving on. Are you happy with that, Steve? I'm just, yep, Thanks. So, Kate.
Hi, thank you. I've just got a couple of questions just from some residents that weren't able to meet the session. So, and obviously because we're tight on time, I'll just pick one for now, and if we've got time later, we'll come back to it. But something that keeps getting raised is the levels of NOx and water vapour. So it's just if anyone could give us a bit more information on that, whether you know, NOx gases and water vapour, is that something that would be contained in the boiler and expelled outside, or would it be collecting in the home?
It's a very good question. So there's a notion that burning hydrogen gives you nothing but water, and that notion is false. That is true if you burn hydrogen in a low temperature fuel cell, but it's not true if you burn it with a flame. If you burn hydrogen with a flame, you get NOx, and NOx is a toxic mixture of gases, one of which, by the way, that's not very prevalent, but one of the 3 gases that make up NOx is also a very strong greenhouse gas. So,
Paul, can I,
yes.
sorry to cut across you. Jan has to leave in just a couple of minutes. I just wonder, Jan, I know you have a heat pump, just 20 seconds. What's it like?
Costs a bit less than heating with gas. Yeah, the installation is a bit of it's a bit of hassle. I won't shy away from saying that. Yeah, it took a day and a half to get it installed. We have an old Victorian terrace in Oxford, 142 years old, so it's not a modern building. It doesn't have an awful lot of insulation, and it keeps us warm. And running costs are a bit below for what they used to be. So that's kind of in a nutshell. I'm more than happy to give more detailed info if people want to reach out to me. That's completely fine.
Okay, thank you very much. So back to you, Paul.
And by the way, the session's being recorded. If anyone has to go, by all means do so. But I'm happy to stick around and answer those other questions, Kate, if they need to be answered. But I'll just finish by saying that NOx is toxic. The notion that burning natural gas inside your home is free of hazard is not true. If you have a gas cooker like I do, make sure that you run your vent, because there is NOx being generated, and it does cause respiratory issues specifically and especially in children. And if you burn hydrogen, it will make more NOx, not less. The water vapor doesn't concern me, but the NOx does greatly.
Thank you.
If it's in your boiler, if it's your boiler rather than your cooker, your boiler is vented outside. So now the hazard moves from your home to your neighbors.
Okay.
This is an interesting one, Paul, because the industry over here, the boiler manufacturers, are claiming that their hydrogen boilers will result in less NOx than the existing natural gas boilers.
Yeah, I would dearly like to see how they figure that. I don't believe that that's the case. They would have to have an awful lot of air in order to drop flame temperatures in order to make that possible, and I think that would severely affect their efficiency. So I don't know if I certainly wouldn't give them the benefit of the doubt on that. I'd want to see the data.
I don't think the data is there yet, and I'm not at all surprised you said what you said. I think we have to wait and see there, but the physics or the chemistry or the whatever.
When you mix air and hydrogen, you get a hotter flame, and if you have a hotter flame, you make more NOx. And if you burn anything, it doesn't matter what it is, in air, the nitrogen in the air reacts with the oxygen that's in the air and makes NOx. It's inevitable.
So other things being equal, what we're hearing is there'll be more nitrogen oxide, the water vapor. You're not concerned about. I think the questions are more in relation to the formation of mold than damage to like explosions, that sort of thing. Any view on that?
The explosion issues are related to the design of the control system for the burners, and also to the leakage that we've already talked about. So I won't belabor that. I wouldn't be worried about extra water vapor due to mold, because I'd be ventilating like heck to get the NOx out of my house. So that's for any open combustion devices like a cooker, an oven or a range, a cooktop. And the closed devices, it's really a matter of the ambient air in your town or your city getting worse because the NOx coming out the pipe will be greater. Either that or they'll have to have lots of excess air, as I mentioned, and that'll drop the efficiency of the appliance and make it more expensive to operate.
So yeah, so what you're saying then is, if you did have one of these in your house, then you'd have an awful lot of ventilation. The flip side of that, though, is it's just going to cost more to heat your home unless you've got a very flash system of heat recovery.
Again, just to be very clear, it's about the cookers. Okay, the NOx emissions and water vapor emissions from your boiler, they're going to go out your flue just like they do now. So they're not really an issue at all. I mean, they're an issue for your neighbors, for the air quality of your neighbors, but they're not an issue for you.
Okay, so it's okay. I'm hearing that's probably not the biggest of issues. The water vapor, the NOx is an issue, and ventilation is required, particularly when a cooker is being run. Yep. Okay. Okay, back to you.
I mean, if we can, and I think you know, this is one of the biggest questions we've had from residents. So, you know, we're fully aware that hydrogen's never been used for domestic heating. We are literally the guinea pigs for this to see if it works. And there is quite a wide concern across, for the resident groups, really, as to everything that we've heard. You know, it's lighter, it's more volatile, it's prone to leakage, it's prone to explosions and all the rest of it. Could there be, and this is just purely your opinions, because again, we don't have the data that sits behind it, but in your opinions, do you think that this could affect our house prices, as in the you know, the value of them, the saleability of them? You know, are people going to want to buy a house that's on a you know, a trial period of explosive gas? You know, and could it impact insurance premiums? You know, we have raised these questions with Cadent, and so far the answer we keep getting back is we don't think so, but that's as far as it goes. So again, I'm fully aware that this is just very much asking your opinion, but
I'll say it should do. I mean, if you're an insurance company and somebody's putting some experimental thing in your house, you'd think that it would affect your insurance rates, wouldn't you? Unless somebody else is mutualizing it for them, you know, somebody else is covering the risk cost, you'd think it would increase your insurance cost, but I don't know that for sure.
Tom, are you still with us?
Yeah, still here.
You're in the UK. What's your take on this?
In terms of insurance premium, I can only think it'll go up. Yeah, but I would be really interested to hear the views of the insurers. I've not seen any publications on what it might do to insurance premiums for the householder. That'd be a good acid test.
And what about house price, like house values? Again, if you don't know the answer, or you don't have an opinion, that's absolutely fine.
I don't have an answer. I don't care. There's other things that worry me more, to be honest with you, as I've explained. Yeah.
I think if you look at houses with mains gas versus no mains gas, or a house with electric storage heaters versus mains gas, you guys probably have as much of an informed view as we do. But in my experience, I would want to pay a lower price for a house that's got electric storage heaters versus one that's got a mains gas boiler. And I think you can do a bit of a read across from electric heating to hydrogen heating, a more expensive form of heating than natural gas, if you like. But yeah, I'm not an estate agent.
Yeah,
that's certainly the case here. Certainly the case here for people that have propane heating, because they're not on the gas grid. Those homes tend to be discounted a bit, because the homeowner goes, my operating cost is going to go up because I have to buy propane, and propane is much more expensive than gas.
The counter I've seen is some evidence that a house with a heat pump will actually have a premium over a house that doesn't.
Yeah, I've seen those stats as well. And an electric car charging port as well, which surprised me because it's not that expensive to fit. But okay, Kate, any more?
I'm just having a quick look through, but actually, I think the majority of them you've covered already. So I'm good. Thank you. I'll put my hand down.
I had I saw something about Towns gas. You know, we used Towns gas in the past, which was around 50% hydrogen. So, you know, is that a justification for using hydrogen today? What, have I picked that concern up, or
it's certainly a statement by Cadent all the time that you were on town gas, and it'll be just the same. It'll just be a switch over.
I find that a really, really weak justification, and I'm old enough to remember the house getting converted from Towns gas to natural gas, and one of the reasons, or two of the reasons that were given, was it's safer and it's cheaper. Yeah. So to put up the fact we use Towns gas in up to the late 60s, early 70s, to me it's a completely it's a house built in sand as an argument for using hydrogen today.
Totally agree.
Yeah. There is one final question on here, Kate, and I think it's a really good one that I'd love to get Tom and Paul's view on. I see quite a lot of discussion on the Facebook group, statements from Cadent about if it doesn't work out, we'll go back to natural gas. I've never seen it, so there's no kind of written guarantee that this is going to happen. And what do you guys think about the feasibility of switching Whitby to the area of Whitby that we're talking about to 100% hydrogen, and then a few years later switching it back to 100% natural gas?
It's feasible, yeah. It depends how they arrange the trials. There's one in Scotland where the proposal is not to convert the existing gas main to hydrogen, but put in a new main of hydrogen for the town and Methil. So that would be very, very easy to switch back. But of course, you can only switch back for a limited period. Eventually, we're going to have to get off fossils heating our houses. So yes, it's feasible. But you would need to know the details of what Cadent are offering or thinking about if the trial isn't successful, how it reverts to whatever. And I guess as we're closing up, that's the offer from Paul, myself, Jan and others. It's not to tell you what to do. It's to be here to give you information to help you make the decision. It's here to give you perhaps questions to ask of Cadent that has no wriggle room, that they can't come out with fluff. Actually, hard questions that need hard answers. So yeah, not here to tell you what to do, here to support you if you need, and I'll use the expression, particularly with people like Paul and Jan, expert advice.
Paul, anything to add to that?
No, I think that's dead right. You know, the other thing to mention is just that the reason they called it town gas is that it tended to be made in each town. It wasn't moved much from town to town. So I agree with Tom that the idea of using town gas is quite weak, and I also agree that you know, obviously these are your homes and this is your decision to make, and our point here is just to make sure that you have the informed basis upon which to ask your own questions, and to make sure that the answers that you're given, you know, make sense, that they ring true. remembering that the people that are pushing some of these sorts of projects benefit from the attempt, whether it succeeds or fails. You know, and I have been in that situation myself in past in my job, and I had to recuse myself from certain questions when people ask me. You know, they would ask me, do you think this is a good thing or not? And I would have to say, well, I'm afraid I'm not a good person to answer that question, because I win whether you say yes or no. You know, I win if you say yes, whether it works or not, right? So I can't, I'm the wrong person to ask, right? But there's an awful lot of people who say, why, of course it's a good idea. Yes, you should do it. You know, and they have no qualms about that because it's not their house.
On the hydrogen to natural gas question, what I would just ask you to consider is, you've heard it's feasible, but the UK timeline is a village trial 2025, a town trial 2030. So the scenario we're talking about is there's problems, and you guys in Whitby want to go back to natural gas. At the same sort of time that you're pushing for that, you're going to have the big guns, if I can refer to them that way, who are lobbying the government very hard for a hydrogen town. It's not going to be a no-brainer for them to say, okay, Whitby, we're going to put you back to natural gas. So I just think you need to be very, very clear. You need to get whatever assurances in writing with kind of legally binding commitments there. That's my kind of point of view for what it's worth.
Yeah, agree. Thank you. Thank you all.
Okay. I would just say thank you to Kate for spearheading all of this as a concluding remark. And maybe just hand it back to you, Kate, if you want to wrap anything up.
Thank you, Peter, and same back to you, because you've been rallying the troops for us in the background as well. So absolutely. So it's good to see so many of the residents that did attend the call as well. So that's really, really great. Thank you for everyone that has attended. You know, that is a long call to do in an evening after we've all been working in an office or wherever all day. So thank you again. Hope you got what you wanted out of it. But again, if this does generate more questions, let us know in the Facebook group, and we'll continue to work with everyone else in the background. You know, we've got more offers of support as well from other industry experts. So I think, you know, personally, I feel quite reassured that people are stepping up to help residents, you know, especially for you, Paul, you know, in a country that you're not even in, and then to everyone else, you know, you don't know any of us. So to step up and say that you will give us information because we can't find it or Caden won't give it to us, then absolutely it's great. And again, thank you to all our industry experts on the call. I think we all need to get some kind of qualification at the end of this, though, after we all know a lot more about hydrogen anyway.
More than you wanted to, I'm sure.
Brilliant. Thank you again. And Peter, I'll pick up with you separately just to see if we do have any trailing questions after the call, or for people that didn't make the call.
We lost you there for a moment, Kate.
Oh, sorry, my connection's playing up a bit. I was just saying then, Peter, if I can catch up with you separately another day, I'll let you I'll let you have a break tonight. But another day, just in case we get questions on the back of this call or from the residents that didn't make it and watch the recording, if there's a way that we can then funnel those back in to see if we can get some answers, that'd be great. Thank you.
Sounds good. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, guys. Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.